Wisconsin Eye's coverage of Campaign 2014 is being brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice supporting Wisconsin hospitals in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with Mr. David Moore of Wisconsin Dells. He's a Republican. He's running in the 81st Assembly District. And just a final note, Wisconsin Eye thanks the Wisconsin Hospital Association for helping make these interviews possible. Mr. Moore, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Talk briefly about your background and your qualifications to run for the 81st District, sir.
Well, I'm 46 years old. I've been married for 25 years to my college sweetheart, Pam, and we have 5 wonderful children. I've been a pastor for about 25 years. I served as a pastor first and then became a senior pastor. And as a pastor, I've dealt with people that have problems, whether it's problems in their marriage, problems with their families, problems with their jobs. A big part of the job of pastoring people, ministering, is helping people work through those problems and find the answers and find the solutions. Okay. So the transition to politics for me occurs where I can take what I've learned dealing with people on an individual level and apply that to a legislative level.
I'm curious about, before we get into some issues, let me talk about some statements on your website. First of all, the answer to nearly every issue is greater personal freedom. Could you just elaborate on that, sir?
Well, I think that our country's founded on the idea that each individual is free to go as far as they possibly can, as long as they don't interfere with the rights of other people. And I think that you will find where government tries to put in a floor under people, it typically ends up putting in a ceiling over people instead. And so I think that freedom is the answer, not more regulation, not more government telling us what to do, what to eat, where to go, where to live, how to live, but rather just people being free to innovate and to create and to do what they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Another issue on your website, you would like to see Wisconsin's personal income tax repealed.
Yes.
That's an $8 billion tax, sir.
Yes, it is.
Are you saying we should cut expenditures, or should we find some other way to make up that money?
You know, I have found in dealing with people that have financial problems, there's always expenditures that can be cut. You know, none of us lives completely all the way pared down to the bone. So I'm sure that in state government that there are expenditures that could be cut. But I think on a realistic level, if you look at our country as a whole, 7 other states have done away with their income taxes, and all 7 of them are doing quite well. So there are answers out there. We have to find the answer that best fits Wisconsin. You know, a lot of people, when you say repeal the income tax, everybody says, well, you just want to pass a state sales tax.
Raise the sales tax
right,
to 10, 11,
right.
12.
And that's not necessarily the answer. It is an answer. It has worked in some places. I think if you will look at the actual numbers, you'll see that there's about an 18% embedded tax in everything we buy when you count the actual sales tax we have already. So I think you'd actually see a net decrease with just an across-the-board sales tax, but that's not necessarily the answer for Wisconsin. We need to find what works best for us. The income tax punishes people for doing well. I'm also serving the Sauk County Board where I live, and I'm on the law enforcement committee, and they were talking about the problems that they have getting people to move from sergeant to lieutenant because they make more as a sergeant. Well, you hear the same thing from factory workers and from other people. They figure out how much overtime they work and where's the cutoff where they're actually making less money because of taxes. I think people, and again, this comes back to a freedom issue, people will do better with their own money. You know, and a pay as you go, pay for use type of a tax, like a sales tax, is something that we ought to look at.
Understand. Let's talk about schools a bit. The issue of private schools and school vouchers. Now, as you know, they were expanded statewide with an enrollment limit of 1,000. What do you think the next budget, the 2015-2017 budget, should do on school vouchers, Mr. Moore?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that question. And first of all, just in the interest of full disclosure, we homeschool our kids.
You do? Okay.
And we pay for it ourselves. We don't ask anybody else to pay for that. That being said, I realize that not everybody has that option. I think that if you're going to have a voucher system, first of all, it needs to be open to more than just a limited number of people. And again, this is the idea of government putting a floor, but instead ending up with a ceiling. But I think that really what you need to look at is the question of, is it a good idea for government money or public money to go to private parties? That typically is not a good idea. Public-private partnerships generally end up working really well for government, not so well for the individual. And we want it to be free. We want people to have choice. We want people to have choices of where to send their kids to school. We want parents to be able to have their kids do the very best that they possibly can. And the idea of doing your best, sometimes it costs more to be able to get to that point. So parents have to make decisions, and the state as a whole is going to have to make some decisions. Are we going to allow people to have more choice and the possible costs of that, or are we going to try to fit everybody into the same mold?
Even though you homeschool, there's a big debate over Common Core standards for the public schools. Do you support those, sir?
Actually, the Common Core standards really affect homeschoolers as well.
They do.
Because they will come into play eventually for what curriculum
sure. For
parents choose.
college exams,
sure.
things like that.
Sure. The problem with Common Core, well, one of the problems with it, is it takes all of the ability away from teachers to actually practice their craft to teach. As I went around getting nomination signatures, I talked to a lot of teachers, just rank and file teachers, and they're not happy with it. The teachers union in Chicago and in New York is against it. And the reason being is because it takes teachers out of the equation. The other problem with it is it takes the parents out of the equation in a lot of ways. You know, we're gradually ceding our children to a government with their education and so forth. Parents need to be more involved. And the idea of standardizing education sounds good, but what that typically means is we're going to say, all right, 2 children from the same basic background, but they're going to learn differently. They're individual children, but we're going to find their common points, and we're just going to teach that. That doesn't help the child that has problems, and that doesn't allow for the growth and success of the child who is gifted. So I think that there's a lot of problems with the idea of standardized. It sounds nice, but what it really ends up being is just kind of a minimum education. I want my kids to have the best education they possibly can. You know, whether they're gifted students or they struggle with dyslexia or whatever, I want my kids to be able to go as far as they possibly can on their own merits.
I have a healthcare question. It's this. The federal government has offered Wisconsin money if we expanded our Medicaid program. Mm-hmm. Governor Walker, as you know, and the leaders of the State Assembly and Senate said, no, we're not going to take the federal money to expand. Was that a wise or unwise choice, sir?
I think it was a wise choice. You know, there's the left will typically say that they're kicking people off of Medicaid. That's not true. What they did was they changed the standards from 200% of the federal poverty level down to 100%. Those between 100% and 200% are going on to the exchanges and are really getting a higher quality insurance plan. And with the subsidies that they're getting, it's not a great cost to them. And so I think it's a good plan simply for this matter. Again, we're back to the issue of freedom. People will have more freedom, more choice, more ability to decide what's right for themselves. And anytime you have the chance to keep something locally controlled, whether it's community or county or state as opposed to federal, it's going to be better for Wisconsin. And that's what we want, is what's best for Wisconsin.
You live in the Dells, and the interstate is very important to the Dells. So let me talk about transportation funding. Projected $650 million shortfall in the next 2-year budget. Should Wisconsin delay some of those highway projects or raise taxes, or what?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm never for raising taxes. Simply because you can only go to the well so often.
No to the gas tax, no to what you and I pay for license plates?
Absolutely.
Okay, excuse me.
No to raising those.
Yes.
Simply because people have to have their own money to deal with. But at the same time, it is under the purview of government to provide roads and for traveling and so forth. And so there has to be a balance between what we can do and what we should do. Now, if you drive up there in the Dells, you'll see a lot of roads that need some construction work that would be state funds. I grew up in Chicago. I know about the toll system. I'm not convinced that's the answer, that it's being floated kind of in the Republican leadership, but I think it's definitely worth looking at.
Okay.
Again, it comes back to a pay for use.
Right. Judge Crabb's ruling said that our constitutional provision prohibiting same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. Your reaction, sir?
That's a tough issue. It's a tough issue because morally, I'm against homosexuality on moral standards. I'm a pastor. Mm-hmm. I believe in living according to the Bible. The Bible's very clear. But I'm not against people who practice homosexuality any more than I'm against someone, for instance, a man and a woman that live together without being married. That's also immoral according to the Scriptures. But it's not illegal. And so I think we have to look at this question: what place does the government have in deciding who can marry who? I don't consider a couple to be married because they have a piece of paper from the government. To me, as a Christian, marriage is a man and woman making a covenant before God to live together as his word says they're going to, or supposed to. So I think that I think government has ventured quite a ways into something that they have no business being into.
Thank you. Another issue in the Capitol and in Washington is whether to raise a minimum wage. Do you have a position on that, sir?
I do. I think that would be a catastrophe.
Why?
I think raising a minimum wage, you know, it's a simple fact, government or business people can do math. You know, they know exactly how much it takes to be profitable, not just to be profitable, but to keep their business open and allow it to expand. You know, we talk about profits like it's a bad thing. Profits are a good thing. Profits are what keep business people able to employ people that work for them. And so for a business that employs people, you know, everybody always uses the example of McDonald's. My daughter started off working as an hourly employee at McDonald's. She's moving up into management now, and she hopes someday to move even farther. And she's doing quite well with what she's doing. She doesn't make a whole lot of money, but she understands that you have to put in your time and you have to do a lot of hard work to get to where you do make money. But I asked her, what do you think about raising the minimum wage? She said, Dad, if we do that, a lot of these young people that we hire are not going to have jobs. Because she said we won't be able to hire them. We won't be able to pay for all the equipment and all the licensing and all the things that we have to do as a business and pay those wages. So I think if you want to see unemployment skyrocket, go ahead and raise the minimum wage. And again, it comes back down to freedom. Do we want our kids to have a minimum wage and a minimum education? Or do we want our kids to have the best education and the best wages they can possibly get? It's not going to come from government.
Two candidates for Attorney General saying those guilty of first offense, drunken driving, that should be a crime. Do you have a position on that, sir?
Well, when you say a crime, you know, it's against the law. Drunken driving is against the law.
It's kind of like a traffic citation now.
Right. I think the penalties need to be stiffer. I don't know that it's a good idea to destroy a person's life. I mean, if you make it along the lines of a serious crime where there's prison time and so forth, that person's that's going to affect them the rest of their life. They're going to have a hard time getting a job. It's going to affect their credit rating. And I don't know that one bad decision is worth that. But at the same time, that one bad decision could result in the death of an innocent person. Mm-hmm. So it's a serious issue that needs to be looked at seriously. And you know, there tends to be emotional overreactions to things like that. I think we need to look at it with a little more of a calculation. What is an appropriate punishment that isn't just a slap on the wrist, but won't also devastate that person's life? It'll just teach them the lesson they need to learn.
One issue on your campaign website deals with parents' rights. What was your reaction to last week's tragic incident where two 12-year-olds tried to stab a third young woman, sir?
You know, parents' rights does not supersede a parent's responsibility. A parent's rights is a parent's right to raise their child. That means they also have a responsibility to raise their child. And the idea that your child is looking at things on the computer, I believe the character they were mimicking was
Slender Man
or Thin Man or something like that.
Yes, sir.
You know, I know what my kids are looking at on the internet. They don't have computers in their rooms. We have a computer in the main part of the house, and I check their phones and I know what they're doing because I'm a parent. That's my responsibility to do. Mm-hmm. And the idea that children should be left unsupervised. I mean, if my kids went off into the woods, I would know that's where they were and what they were doing. And they wouldn't be going out in the woods with a knife after watching some heinous thing on the internet like that. So I think it falls under parental responsibility.
Two final questions, sir. Is there any other major campaign theme that you emphasize that I haven't asked you about?
You know, really it is about freedom. It is about getting government back in the hands of the people. The old quote by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Okay. You know, we've kind of eliminated the people from that to where it's just become governing of the people. And as I've walked around and I've talked to people, you know, it's amazing. I've talked to people that have lived in their homes for 20 years, have never spoken to a candidate before. And those same people, many of them have said, we don't vote anymore because it doesn't seem to do any good. So there's this huge disconnect between the voters and the candidates. And I think that disconnect is in large part because candidates have said, well, it's, you know, if we talk to them, we become accountable to them. And the reason I'm running is because I want my kids to have a free country, but more than that, I want my kids to know that they have the responsibility for a free country. We can't just sit around and complain about the way government is. We have to get involved, and we have to go out, we have to serve, and we have to represent the people of this district. That's what I want to do.
And then finally, is there any difference with your opponent you want to highlight in the primary? You
know, my opponents are both good men, nice guys. I've met them both. I know the one a little better than the other, but I've met them both. I think they both have a good heart. I think they both desire to do what's right for Wisconsin. We differ in our approach. My approach is more people-based, whereas theirs is a little more legislative-based. And you say, well, you're running for the legislature. Yes, but I'm running to put government back into accountability to the people, not to make the people more accountable to government. And I think that's a real big difference.
Very good. Thank you. David Moore of Wisconsin Dells is a Republican candidate in Assembly District 81. The primary is August 12th. Mr. Moore, thanks for visiting with Wisconsin Eye.
Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.